Give it a minute to start out.
Okay. Let me know when.
All right, it's on.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to MHI's Healing Circle. We're excited tonight to have Dr. Janet Taylor here, who's going to talk to us about mental health and on minorities. You know, this is Minority Mental Health Month, and she's our speaker today. Dr. Janet is a community psychiatrist in Sarasota, Florida. She is on the front line battling the emotional and economic impact of mental illness. She holds an MD from the University of Louisville, completed her psychiatric resident at New York Medical College, and obtained her MPH from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health and Health Promotion and Disease Prevention. She had a column in Family Circle magazine, Ask Dr. Janet. Dr. Janet is also frequently featured on ABC, Good Morning ABC, Good Morning America, and NBC, The Today Show, and CNN. She is a former host of the Discovery Health and OWN series, Facing Trauma, and was the guest care director for the Jeremy Kyle Show. She is an expert in implicit bias and conscious allyship, and the author of the Amazon bestseller, The Courageous Classroom, creating a culture of safety for students to learn and thrive in 2021. So without further ado, I introduce to some and present to others, Dr. Janet Taylor. It's all yours, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you, Helen, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks to you on the call and those who are listening live stream or via Facebook. What I'm going to talk about, and I encourage you to think about if you have any questions. There's no silly questions, write them in the chat and send them because I'm happy to answer them. But I'm going to talk about mental health in America, especially as it relates to people of color, Blacks, Latinx, Asian, non-Pacific Islanders, anyone who is considered an other in America, because certainly being an other impacts our mental health. And to understand the context for that means to go back certainly 400 years when Black people, Africans, were brought here against their will. But prior to that, we have to honor the Native Americans who were here, who discovered America. There were 18 million Native Americans, and now they're less than 4 million. And certainly, much like Black history, people want to wipe that out. Certainly for Native Americans, it's hard to find history that's written later than the 1800s. And that takes a toll on everyone's mental health. So when we talk about mental health in America, particularly for people who are others, we have to talk about the history of racism in medicine, understanding that mental health is something that comes from the brain, and our brain is a part of our health. And racism and bias have existed in America for 400 years and still exist. And so before I talk about racism in and of itself, I just want to talk about how it presented in health. For example, we know that when Africans were brought here against their will and made to be slaves, to justify that racialized capitalism, to justify slavery, wrongly, there was a thought that Black people could not manage themselves, that our brains were smaller. And in fact, there's a pseudoscience, a fake science that really started then, where, for example, a scientist put buckshot in the skull of a white man and then of a Black man to wrongly show that Black people's brains were smaller, which we know is not true. And so those kind of things were just used to justify the need that people needed to be slaves, needed to be managed. There was something Samuel Cartwright, who was a psychiatrist, wrote about called drapetomania, that tried to say that a freed Black person was more likely to be depressed and psychotic than a slave. We know that's wrong, but throughout history, what has persisted is the fact that this thought that Black people don't get depressed. We can work hard and work for low wages and, get fired and all those things that happen, and it does not affect us as much, which we know is not true. When I was in medical school, which was not that long ago, but certainly in the 80s, I remember being a resident on a unit, and there was a Black woman who came in, and she was depressed and psychotic. And the reason that she was depressed is she had had a job for 15 years, and her white boss's daughter came in from college and needed a job for the summer, so they fired her. And so I remember the residents and my attending saying that doesn't happen. Well, of course we know that's happened. And so it's those kind of incidents, which are really like a trauma that happen to people who are other, that can impact how we feel about the world, how we see the world, and how the world sees us. So racism, which is conscious, which is meant to separate people, which is meant to keep people out, which is meant to make people feel unequal and unwelcome, is something that is deliberate, and it impacts us at the cellular level. Then you have things like unconscious bias, implicit bias, which is largely not conscious, but those assumptions that we make about people that also hurt, those day-to-day microaggressions, everyday put downs. For example, you could be a Black man in a suit about to go into a restaurant, and a white man may pull up and throw you his car keys, assuming you're the valet. You could be on an elevator as a Black person or a brown person, and, a white woman would come in and grab her purse tighter. All of those things can affect us at the cellular level and can lead to stress. So when we're talking about mental health and wellness in people of culture, in bodies of culture, racism plays a big part, microaggressions play a big part, certainly inequity in income, access to schools, access to healthcare, access to where we live, all of those factors, which we know are systematically, institutionally based on racism, affect us. Recently, the morbidity and mortality report came out yesterday, actually, that showed that we know that the opioid crisis, which is a crisis, someone overdoses almost and dies every 6 minutes in America. And that includes children as young as 10 who are overdosing and not necessarily dying, but overdosing. But it's a huge problem in America right now. And it's increased 30%. The number of people who've died, which was last year almost 100,000 people, it's increased almost 30%. But populations that have the biggest increase are Black people and American Indian and Pacific Islanders. And that increase has been 44% and 45%. So it's a population that we are missing because, in my opinion, and I work with individuals who are addicted to opiates, the opioid epidemic has been whitewashed, and who we see as a face of the opioid epidemic doesn't always look like me. And in fact, that's a population that we really have to look out for. And a factor to consider is that in Black men over the age of 65 are dying of overdose at rates 7 times of that of white men. And a lot of times those individuals are not getting treatment. So it's another problem and systematic of access to medical care, systematic of bias in medicine, and just proves a point that when we're looking at mental health and wellness, we have to look at everyone in America, and certainly those who are most at risk. I don't like to talk about mental health without talking about mental wellness and what it means to have a positive mental health. We know that, the World Health Organization says that there is no physical health without mental health, but positive mental health certainly is when you have the ability to work, to love, to have community, to take care of yourself, and certainly to advocate for yourself. And I think, as Helen mentioned, she said 40% of people have a mental health issue. The reality is almost 50% of Americans would have a diagnosable mental condition, not necessarily depression or schizophrenia, but certainly have something like an adjustment disorder. And Helen mentioned about the loss of your great grandbaby, I think you said, and your grandson. I mean, to lose 2 important individuals, those souls in your life, it is significant. And when we talk about Black women in particular, there's this notion that we're strong, we're resilient, we just bounce back. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge what that means to lose people and to be with your pain. And so often it's assumed because you may be a Black woman or because you may be Latinx woman, that you can just bear whatever burdens come your way. But it really pays a toll that we have to pay attention to. But the point is, if on this call, half of us would have something that certainly might merit paying more attention to it or talking to a healthcare provider. So that is significant. And the fact is, our brain is in our body. Our brain is in control of every single organ in our body. And we have to lose the stigma about what it means to ask for help, or to say I'm depressed, or to say I'm sad, to say I'm anxious, or even to say I might be drinking too much or using drugs, because the fact is, it's a medical condition that is able to get treatment for. So when you think about mental health in America, we cannot ignore the fact that, we're still in a pandemic. People are still getting COVID. Jobs are still affected. The economy, inflation, there's all these factors. We still, have criminal justice situations where Black and brown people are still arrested and killed before our eyes. Since George Floyd, just as many unarmed Black men and women have been killed by the police. So all of those factors play a part. And certainly dealing with homelessness and education, kids who are trying to readjust back into school. We know that Black and brown kids disproportionately have lost years of math and science. And what does that mean for them? For people of color, education and level of education is the number one predictor, not only for where you're going to live or what job you're going to have, but for healthcare outcomes. So when we have a huge proportion of children who are Black and brown who are in schools who have lost that, then that means that we have to look at many factors that lead to how our health is and what the outcomes are. So when we're talking about mental health, we're not just talking about going into a doctor's office and getting a diagnosis, we're talking about prevention. So how can we identify when someone may be sad, which can lead to depression? So if you are listening and you have been sad or depressed for longer than 2 weeks in a row, or feel like worst case, you want to hurt yourself, have difficulty motivation getting up out of bed, going to school, doing the work you have to do, overeat, undereat, all of those activities that you should do, then you may be depressed. There's I think it's 988, I should know this, a new free hotline if you were suicidal that just started a couple of days ago, where you can get help within your area, whatever county you're in. There are certainly services and free access to talk to someone. SAMHSA has a line that you can talk to people if you need to, that can help you with finding therapists if you are uninsured or underinsured. But the point is, you can talk to your healthcare provider, nurse practitioner. But if you find that you may feel depressed or not sure, talk to someone. It's not a time to trauma dump with your friends online. It's not a time to talk to your best girlfriend or partner. Get the help that you need, because you have to be your best advocate. So if you're depressed longer than 2 weeks, that's it. We know that people who are depressed and anxious may self-medicate with alcohol or drugs to change how they feel, which can create a whole nother problem. And again, if you find that you are using drugs or alcohol in a way that you're not going to work, you're not going to school, you're not taking care of your family, get help. I work in a program at Centerstone of Florida that is a medication assistant treatment program. So if you have a history of alcoholism or have issues with alcohol, we can treat you. There's medications. Vivitrol is a shot. There's naltrexone, which you can take by mouth, that can help with how much you drink. The way it works is it goes to the mu receptor in your brain, which is where pleasure is. Naltrexone is an antagonist. It blocks it completely. And so you don't get the pleasure from drinking. And people who use naltrexone and Vivitrol with AA, with therapy, have an 80% chance of not drinking alcohol. If you're addicted to opiates, we have Suboxone, we have Subutex, buprenorphine, which work on the brain to trick the brain into feeling like you're getting the opiate, the pill, or heroin, fentanyl, whatever you're taking, so that you don't do all those risky things that you have to get it, and so that you can heal your brain enough to make better decisions for yourself. Again, it's never just a pill. You usually do need therapy, you need support, you need to look at all those factors. But the point is, help is there. So if you recognize that you have behaviors that are impacting your ability to function, then you can get the help that you need. We know disproportionately, as I mentioned, that Black and brown people are in the criminal justice system, and that's a whole nother trauma. And in fact, it's, our addiction problem is largely a trauma problem. And what is a trauma? One definition I heard about a trauma that I like is a trauma is anything that happens to you that makes you feel like you were not nurtured. Anything that happens to you where you feel unnurtured. So it doesn't have to be worst case, you witness someone getting shot or you get shot. It can be anything that happens to you. And we know that our children are sexually abused. Our children are emotionally abused with people cursing and yelling at them. And some of our kids are neglected where people don't care about them at all. Those are all traumas. When you witness as a child parents who may be in a domestic violence situation or other people where things are violent, or you may be ignored, that can lead to trauma. And we know that a traumatized brain is a brain that impacts your ability to learn and to feel the emotions that you need to feel, because when you have been traumatized, it's like your brain is hyper alert. Your brain is sensitive to what could happen next. As you are listening to me speak right now, your brain is taking in 11 million bits of information per second and only consciously able to process 40 or 50. So you can imagine what that means to a traumatized brain with what everything, mostly of what you're functioning with or aware of could be what could hurt you. You can imagine how that impacts how you learn, how you interact with people. Are you going to be defensive and waiting for something to happen? Or are you going to be passive and avoid? So trauma, especially for Black and brown people, is something related, to racism, related to criminal justice system, related to how people may be treated where they work, where they live, where they go to school, is significant. And so what can we do so that we don't pass on that trauma? We have to heal ourselves. There is something called epigenetics, which basically looks at what can happen at the cellular level to us as individuals, and certainly for women who are carrying fetuses, a fetus that may be related to even climate change, related to exposure to trauma, exposure to violence. All those factors can alter the brain of the fetus and prime them so that at a lower level, they may be depressed or anxious. And so what that means is, as a child grows, they're going to either lean into what their mother may have enjoyed or recoil from whatever trauma the mother felt. So there's no question that we can inherit our trauma and inherit our pain. And one of our responsibilities as individuals is to deal with it so that what emerges from us, what we carry with us, is what makes us better, so that we don't pass it on to the next generation. So knowing all that, it's really significant that we heal and ask for help and take care of ourselves. And we know that for a Black woman may present almost 10 times to her primary care doctor or healthcare practitioner before she's even asked about her mood. So there are missed opportunities in terms of treating people who may be depressed. We know that in certain areas, especially places where people need it the most, that someone may present to a mental health clinic like what I work in and are 70% less likely to come back. And primarily that's because of how they felt when they came in. Where did they feel respected? Did they feel labeled? Were they ignored? All those other factors that have not as much to do with them as much as us as a healthcare system in terms of how welcoming we are to all kinds of people. But that being said, if you know that you're suffering mentally, if you know that you're suffering psychologically, you're having trouble sleeping, eating, your thoughts are bad, you feel depressed, you feel sad, you may be hearing voices, worst case, you may feel like you want to hurt yourself or someone else, it's up to you to get the help that you need. Because right now, our society is reeling from feeling uncertain, reeling from feeling like, nothing works, reeling from chaos. And what feels like people who may not like you, or feeling like people are ignoring you or not treating you the right way, may simply not be that they don't like you, but that everybody is dealing with something. And so the people who may usually come up to you and say, how's it going? How are you doing? I missed you. They may not be saying that because they're dealing with their own emotions and feelings. So there's never been a greater time to understand how you are doing and recognize what your resources are, whether you have insurance or don't have insurance. Talk to someone, call a hotline, talk to your healthcare provider, talk to your minister, talk to anybody so that you can get your mental health together so that you can optimize how you should be feeling. So I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions or comments.
I have one comment in here, great explanation of trauma. And then great talk by Dr. Merritt, great talk. That was Rebecca. And great talk, so wise and beautiful. Why we need more Black doctors like Dr. Taylor.
You went on mute there for the last part,
Uh-oh.
Ms. Helen.
Sorry about that. Where did I leave off? I don't know where I left off. Great talk, so wise and beautiful. Why we need more Black doctors like Dr. Taylor. Epigenetics are such important influences. Trauma is inherited across the world. And he said, what should someone do if their friend and family member says they want to harm themselves?
So when someone says they want to harm themselves, that's a red flag. That's when you have to get a mental health provider involved. So I would call 911 and get them somewhere where they can be evaluated by a professional in terms of what's going on. Sometimes there's something known as passive suicidal ideation, where someone may not have an active plan, but in fact may say, if I could just go to sleep, or when and not wake up, or, I just want my problems to change, right? It can be reactive, where someone may have broken up with their boyfriend, girlfriend, they're like, I'm going to kill myself. That is not up to you unless you're a trained mental health provider to make that distinction. So get them to someone who can evaluate them. And obviously, if someone has guns or mentions a plan, you need to call the police to remove their guns and certainly monitor whatever medication and what's around. But the real point is, if someone says they want to hurt themselves, let a healthcare provider evaluate them. It's a really critical factor.
All right, I have another question here. It says, discuss anxiety and how to handle panic attacks or help someone else handle that.
So anxiety is something that is really brain-based, but can evolve and make you really notice it in throughout your body. As I mentioned earlier, as you're listening to me, your brain is taking in 11 million bits of information per second. And sometimes a thought can trigger that whole flight, fight, and fear response, that stress response that may produce anxiety. So you may feel feeling in the pit of your stomach, your hands may sweat, you may get a headache, your chest may feel like it's, your heart's pumping out of your chest, whatever feeling it is, and you identify it as anxiety, it's important to do that. And in some cases, just recognizing it as anxiety, maybe you can take some deep breaths, stand up, go for a walk, drink some water, and it goes away. If you find that it does not go away, then you should talk to your healthcare provider. There are medical causes of anxiety. Some medications can make you feel anxious. Thyroid disease can make you feel anxious. There are a number of things going into withdrawal, not sleeping, all of those factors. Even too much caffeine and sugar can make you feel anxious. So try to find the cause of that anxiety. A panic attack certainly has components of anxiety, but a panic attack can come out of the blue. Things are great. There's no identifiable stressor, you're feeling well. And then all of a sudden you get this feeling like the world is caving, like maybe you're going to die or you're having a heart attack. And panic attack and anxiety both can be treated with medication. But the key thing is go and get a physical, talk to your healthcare provider. In some cases, you may need to talk to a therapist, or if something's happened, there's something called post-traumatic stress disorder, where you get reoccurrent images or feelings of something that you may have witnessed directly or even indirectly. You don't have to have been there to get post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you notice that you get a recurrent images, or you get panicky feeling that's related to a situation or something that you've witnessed directly or been involved in, there's treatment for that as well. But anxiety is the #1 psychological complaint and disorder in America right now. And a lot of people feel anxious. Now, about the brain, our brain does not like uncertainty. Our brain likes facts. And when faced with situations that feel uncertain, situations that feel chaos, in lieu of facts, our brain will make up a worst case scenario and take us down this roller coaster that we can stop with facts. So if you're worried about your finances, don't just worry about them. Pull out your bills, try to find a plan, talk to a financial advisor if you can. If you're worried about your weight or a condition that you have, go and see your doctor, weigh yourself, get blood work, do those things, because with facts, no matter how bad the situation is, our brain does better with facts. So when we talk about stress, again, which begins and ends in the brain, it's important that you know that stress is just a word. It's important for everybody to know how stress impacts them and how it makes them feel. And if you are living a life that is full and complete, there is no doubt that you're going to have stress in it. And there's 3 kinds of stress. There's a eustress or a positive stress that enables you to, get your homework done or get your kids dropped off or do whatever it is. Hopefully when you do that event, then your body will settle down, right? And that's what you want. And then there's something called toxic stress, which is that unrelentless, like even if you don't have something to do, like 24/7, that your body is just on. And the way stress works in our body is that when our brain notices that something's stress, and that could be something we hear, a thought, something we see, it basically releases cortisol to turn on or turn off every organ in our body. So if you think about what you need, if you're going through that fight, freeze, or fight, freeze, or flight, run away, and you need energy, right? If you're going to fight. So your blood releases glucose into your system, releases fat, which can put you at higher risk for high blood pressure and high cholesterol. It releases fibrinogen, which makes your blood clot, because if you're going to be in the heat of battle, then you need to clot. But all of those factors mean chronic stress can lead to strokes and heart disease. It turns on your immune system, so it goes into overdrive. And we know that that can lead to cancers, can, worsen anything like lupus or any one of those conditions. It can cause anxiety and depression, and also turn off reproductive hormones, because the last thing you're thinking about in the heat of battle is reproducing. So chronic stress, that unrelenting stress where you don't get a break, is bad for you and will kill you. And so the point is, we've got to find times to recover. And how you find those times to recover is by creating them primarily. So you have to notice when you feel good. You need to sleep, get regular sleep, especially during stressful times, because that allows your brain to make new connections and to really rest, even though the brain never turns off, but it allows it to rest. And we know that even like if your phone, if it overheats, it won't work. If, sometimes you have to turn your phone off or your computer's off to give them a break. Our bodies are not machines. We need to be turned off too. So if you're in stressful situations, the key is to allow yourself some recovery. And part of that means, especially for people of color, where we have been sold this bill of goods that we can do anything and take on anything, and we're stronger than most, and we're so resilient, is to kind of really challenge that message. We're human. And so we need to take breaks. We can ask for help. It's not, there should be no shame in your game to go and talk to a therapist or talk to your healthcare provider or talk to your partner, or talk to your kids about what you need for them, especially as women of color, so that we can find those times to recover, to allow ourselves to be the best that we can be, and really understand that a healthy brain fuels a healthy body. And when we have a healthy brain, we can make the right decisions. And so this whole notion of being superwomen and just being able to put on our cape and just deal with whatever, I think, again, has to be challenged, because for people of color, and especially for Black men, they die 10 years earlier than they should. Black women die earlier. Latin men and women die earlier. And part of that is certainly the stress of racism, suboptimal housing and conditions, but also the burdens that happen from, having to be the best all the time, or having just to struggle through things. So how we live certainly impacts how we think, and the decisions decisions that we make and the opportunities that we have. And then, they're dealing with structural racism and at every institution, including healthcare, can impact the treatment that we get. So given COVID-19, given all the social injustice that's happening, we really have to pay attention to, how we are doing, what we're thinking, what we're eating, what we're fueling our brain and bodies with, how we are exercising. Our brain is 3% of our body weight and utilizes 25% of our blood glucose and oxygen. So when we're working out, it's not just to look good, which is, everybody wants to do that, but it's also pumping brain nutrients and getting blood flow to our brain so that we can make better decisions. Our brain is the first organ in our body that is the recipient of whatever we put into our mouths. And we know that our brain also connects to our gut through the vagus nerve. So that whole brain and stomach gut connection is real. And, what can we do to optimize that? Certainly is to pay attention to it and to really be able to mitigate our stress and find ways to deal with it in a healthy way.
Okay, great. And that was my next question, but you answered it as you were talking, which was about nutrition, exercise, and sleep. So you answered that question. The next question was someone asked how to reach you, to get more about you. And it was put in the chat that Dr. Janet and Centerstone can be linked through from www.the-mhi.org to community dashboard community. They're one of our community partners, so you can reach her through that. The next question, let's see what other little things I have here. Okay. All right, that was the flight freeze and overdue anxieties. Just have to find times to recover. Notice when you feel good. Okay. I think you kind of covered everything. Chief, do we have anything from Facebook? Any questions or from YouTube?
Nope.
No, we don't have any. All right. So we could turn it back over to you, Dr. Janet.
Yep.
Okay.
So one thing certainly to think about is the mental health of our girls. We don't talk enough about our Black girls. From 2001 to 2017, the number of Black girls who had actually killed themselves has increased by almost 170%. So we as mothers and as fathers, as teachers, whomever, when we have to pay attention to the mental health of our children, but in particular our Black girls. And so take them seriously if they say they're depressed, which, kids don't normally say, oh, I'm depressed. And you may find that they're not sleeping as well, or they change their friends, or they act differently. Don't just dismiss that as normal kid stuff, and certainly if your child says, they feel like they want to hurt themselves, take it seriously, because we are missing it. And we really want all children to have that opportunity to, not only grow up, but grow up in a way that they can really maximize their opportunities. So sometimes as parents who are dealing with our own stressors and our own issues, we may miss what's happening with our children. And so, one of the ways certainly that we can help is to talk to our kids about, you don't want to overload them with whatever your life was like or what's going on with you, but just to make that connection between, what happens when you don't feel your best, what happens when you're sad, share stories about your life so you can connect with your kids, and so that your kids know that you can always come to them. Because what we don't want are our kids and teenagers going to their friends first, because you may never find out, or going to people who may not have their best interests at heart. And so those things we learn about ourselves as adults, if you're a person of a certain age, like I know you said you were 65 and you don't look 65, I'm 60, our age, we were really taught to keep our problems to ourselves. Our parents weren't telling us everything going on, but it's a different generation now. And so I think as parents, we really have to extend our humanness to our children so that they can learn how to deal with things. And the same aspects of how we may take care of a stressful situation, we can teach them to do. For example, number one is to understand when a situation is stressful. So what does that mean? You know, how does it make you feel? And, you know, earlier, Helen, you were doing the exercise where people were drawing, or, you know, kids can identify a color, a song that may help them tap into what they're feeling. So teach them those things. So once you recognize that maybe there's an issue that you need to take care of, then you can do a reset. And so that means, again, getting back into what I said, that recovery. And how do you do that? You know, we can teach our children, as we teach ourselves, how to exercise on a regular basis, going for walks. And we know that anything that gets your heart rate up is beneficial. So you don't have to go to the gym. You don't have to run a marathon. You just need to walk faster, or even dance in front of your TV for 20 minutes just to get your heart rate up. It's important to really pay attention to what you are eating. You know, again, what we eat fuels our brain, and our brain is what's going to help us as we make decisions, and certainly make better choices, or have to decide what something means and how we make meaning of an experience. So that's really important. Sleep is critical. We know our kids are not getting enough sleep. When we tuck them away in bed, invariably they'll have their phones with them, and our kids aren't sleeping. We need to sleep as well. Understanding as we get older, you know, our sleep patterns may change, which means if you're having trouble sleeping, that's another reason to go and see your doctor. But pay attention to your diet, make sure you're exercising. And sometimes if you're lucky enough, you can take little cat naps to catch up, but your brain really needs that. To think about positive thinking, you know, reframing. We can change our brain with our thoughts. And so when something happens that may be difficult, that may be painful, instead of using it like, oh my gosh, like what happened? This always happens. Instead of saying like, why is this happening to me? You can reframe it and say, how is this happening for me? Or if you have a negative thought, certainly you can acknowledge it, but then you can ask yourself, what's another way to think of it? Which is really what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is not where you just accept whatever's happening. Mindfulness is when you recognize that something's happened, notice how it makes you feel, and then change your mindset, flip it to do something about it. And so it's not denying that you're in pain, but really accepting the fact that you are, and then looking at the growth that can come from it. So that aspect is really important. To use evidence-based information. So, you know, find out your grades, open a bill, weigh yourself, do all those things so your brain can deal with facts. Our brain does the best when we have evidence, and that way we can avoid certainly going down this rabbit hole of the rabbit hole of just, you know, negative thoughts and all these other factors by worrying about something that may not have even happened yet. Certainly we want to practice self-care. And as the great Audre Lorde said, self-care is not selfishness, it's self-preservative. And that's an act of political warfare, which means telling people no, which means I'm not going to cook dinner for you because I'm going for a walk, or you can make your own food, or you can clean your room. All of those are some aspects of self-care. Self-care is not just, you know, going to the spa or getting your nails done, but making your mammogram appointments or a pap smear or PSA, taking care of yourself in that way. It's recognizing when you are in pain and what you need to do about it. It's maybe going to see a therapist if you need to, or cutting toxic people out of your life if you need to, or being full with your grief if you need to. Those are all aspects of self-care that are critical during this time, but it means carving out the time to recognize what is happening to you so that you can do something about it. It's also important to embrace people, you know, to get back that community. We know that chronic isolation and loneliness is as big a risk factor for your health as smoking and drinking. And primarily that's because of how chronic loneliness and isolation triggers a stress response. And as I mentioned earlier, the stress response can make you feel sicker. And so our mental health and physical health and spiritual health are all connected. And again, you add on top of that racism, you add on top of that like social injustice. It's just like this melting pot of things that could, you know, seemingly harm you. But, you know, we have a secret weapon, and that secret weapon is our brain, because our brain can really reframe. Our brain can help us kind of make that way when there's no way. Our brain can help us understand that we are born with all that we need, but it gets layered with, you know, pain from drama, failed relationships, what people have said and done to you, and peeling off all of that, you find this fire that is always there, that, sometimes it may need to be reignited, but hope is always there. Where there's darkness, there's light. I mean, our history have been full of opposites. And so it's up to us to find, we're feeling a certain way, what we can do to dig ourselves out of those holes. And then, just the importance of connecting with other people with touch, and especially now, not being reclusive. I mean, I know people who are like, I'll never go out, around other people again. And, our lives weren't meant to be lived like that. We really need to go and experience all that we need to experience, no matter what. Now is not a time to be afraid because of the color of your skin. It really, all those factors. I mean, there's nothing new that's happening now that hasn't happened before, in terms of injustice and feeling like, people want to target you. I think sometimes you have to turn off the TV so that you can take a real insightful look at, what you really, who the fight really is against. And for most of us, that fight is against ourselves. There's no one who can stop you from reaching your own potential. And certainly not the thought or the threat of, what seems like is larger than usual, where people just are out to get you. That's not the case. Most people don't want conflict. And the biggest barrier to us really achieving what we need to can be ourselves. But, if you have, again, mental illness, make sure that you get treated. It's treatable. If you're feeling a certain way, if you feel like you've been treated unjustly because of your gender, because of who you love, talk to someone and find the support that you need. Whoops, you're on mute.
Thanks. Are there any more questions or comments? Anybody on Zoom? Or go ahead, Rebecca.
Hey, I just wanted to thank you for the information. And there's new things that I heard and things that I heard that kind of reiterate things I've learned in the past, and especially the social isolation part. So actually had the opportunity to spend some time in the office recently, and I recognized how rejuvenating it was for my soul, just for everything, to be around people. And I think I hadn't realized how much that isolation, even though we meet through Zoom on a regular basis, but that really being in the presence of other people can just be so fulfilling. And so as long as we're being safe and protecting ourselves with COVID still going around, I think it's wonderful to have those opportunities, and I appreciate the reminder.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. I mean, you think about most of communication, 80% is nonverbal, right? And so we lose sight of the fact that, I think we have this, like a text, an email, it's just not a Zoom. It's just not the same as what you feel, the energy you get from other people, seeing other people. And it's really, really important. So, yeah. So, I think sometimes you have to seek out those times just to be in kind of community with others, and certainly at work.
Okay. Becca, I think you had a question or some information.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and make sure people know about some of the programs that we can assist with. And of course, huge thank you to Dr. Taylor. I, listening and looked up at the clock and really felt like we had passed through most of the time, because just so much information and so much deep stuff. And I was processing so much, but it was 15 minutes in. So huge thanks to you. But I do want people to know, you're encouraging people to get help, and we have a care coordination program, because getting help is so important, it is so necessary, and the medical system is incredibly daunting for some of the very reasons you were discussing today. So I want to encourage anyone also to look into that, and we can help connect people to providers. Our hotline number is 941-906-9484. And you can also find more information about that on our website, the-mhi.org. And also you can stay tuned there. We're launching some health-based programs in the fall, including mind-body medicine training and a pre-diabetes prevention program, which connect to some of the very wellness skills that both you, Helen and Dr. Taylor, that have been talking about today. So thank you again, and take care, everybody.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. So you're right. Healthcare can be daunting, number one, especially if you talk about that maybe you only speak Spanish, right? And what does that mean? Or maybe you have less than a third grade education. You feel like people aren't going to understand. Care coordination is really key. People you trust, as long as you agree that they can be in the exam room with, or, go to your doctor's office with you, take someone you trust with you, write your questions down. If you leave, and don't leave your doctor's office or healthcare provider's office without knowing exactly what your diagnosis is, the medications you're supposed to take, what next steps are. And if you have doctors that don't spend time with you like that, then you need to find new doctors, because as we can't, the most critical people in our society who need the healthcare, we can't let them down like that. But part of it is really advocating for yourself. I mean, doctors are stressed too, systems are stressed, but your health is really important. So do everything that you can to walk away with and have the information that you need. So thanks for saying that.
All right, thank you. Any more questions? If not, Dr. Taylor.
I just had a quick comment.
Oh, go ahead. Okay,
Yeah.
Andre.
I was going to say, I appreciate the talk. Dr. Taylor, it's good to hear about like how kind of like social determinants of health can affect trauma and things like that. And I love how you talked about social media and seeing like social injustices can maybe affect trauma in that way. So I just wanted to ask a quick question. Like, how do you, I know you said like in terms of when you see things on like the media, things like that, it's best to turn it off. But like, how do you think like social media plays a role into like the trauma of like children, especially when you have like videos prevalent of like police violence against Black youth and things like that, or you have like mass shootings every other day. So like, how does like kind of like those events that we have in the US kind of affect the trauma of Black people?
Oh, no, thank you for saying that. And thanks for mentioning social determinants of health, because I don't think I actually said it and you did. But so let me just explain what the social determinants of health are. We know that it's not, that health is not based on just the color of your skin or your gender or even that interaction with the doctor. Everything that's happened to you in terms of birth, exposure to poverty, level of school, trauma, abuse, all of those factors, access, even being able to pay for your medication after you get a prescription, racism and bias in the healthcare system are all parts of social determinants of health. So that's one thing. And so you need to be able to ask for what you need when you go into clinics. Ask if they have a program where you can get your medications cheaper. Ask if you can get a generic and not a name brand. So really advocate for yourself. But trauma is a huge, huge, huge factor. The Greek word for trauma is wound. That's where it comes from. And so trauma really is at the root of so much of illness and everything that we have. And so social media, on the one hand, if we didn't have films of George Floyd, if we didn't have a video of Michael Brown from Ferguson, I don't think we would have the recognition that we have today in terms of just, the roots of policing, which come from slavery and how that's persisted with no accountability when police officers kill unarmed Black men and brown men and women. And I'm not anti-police. We need the police, but there are some police officers who, why can't a Black man or a brown man get questioned or get arrested without getting killed? That's what we're saying, right? And so that impacts people. So on the one hand, I think if we didn't have those films, we would not have that evidence. But there's so much that happens with young kids and bullying on social media. There's this notion that you have to be perfect, which creates a low self-esteem. And so much time, I think, is spent on social media with negative images, negative words that get incorporated into people's soul. There are studies that show that for kids and teenagers, they can't distinguish between actual content from friends and sponsored content. So the messages that people get about themselves, about groups of people, about who's dangerous and who's not, is really being imprinted in a way that does not allow the normal development of how you form your own ideas and attitudes. And then you add on top of that, for younger people, knowing that for kids, the brain does not finish developing until 25 or 26. So we think about what input that's had and how it can impact the frontal cortex, which is where decision making happens, then it's just really ripe for a brain that feels uncertain. And so it's not there, some of the highest rates of anxiety are in individuals 18 to 25, and right behind that are in our young kids who just feel uncomfortable with everything and have anxiety about everything. So I think on the one hand, there's no question technology is here to stay. People's opinions are going to be here to stay. But if you know that looking at social media gives you anxiety, if you know that when you're comparing yourself on TikTok or whatever app you're on, that you feel worse than when you got on, then you've got to take yourself off. And if you know that relentless images of people getting killed or shot create something in you, turn it off. You can read the newspaper, you can, find some evidence-based thing to look at. You can find other ways to know what you need to know about current events. But sometimes I think you really have to turn that off so you can give your brain and body a chance to settle in, because the whole point is that the world is abundant. There are things that you can do, that you can achieve, and no one should be able to limit you. And so when we find that messages and things are limiting ourselves, then we have to question the path that we are on and find ways to keep pushing yourself. Are you in healthcare? You yourself? Oh, I can't hear you.
You muted.
So, yeah, I work in the health department in Sarasota. So
okay. And what's your goal, your ultimate goal?
I think it would be to address social determinants of health in minority communities. Really is the goal that drives me. Ever since I've been in college, since I learned about social determinants of health, I always felt that that's a good way of thinking about health in general, is that it's not solely individual. You have to think about the various other factors. And I think when I met Dr. Merritt, we had a talk about social determinants of health. And I know care coordination is all about addressing that as well. And so I just think it's an important topic that everyone should kind of know about, and it'll help your life in general. So.
Yeah, no. So I got a master's in public health. I worked in Harlem for a long time, where it was I like you were focused on the individual. And then I got a master's in public health from Columbia, where you focus on communities and you look at systems, and then there are many ways to change healthcare outcomes. For example, people talk about climate change. We know that climate change impacts people of color disproportionately. They did a study in LA that showed that, if you the long boulevards in LA, as you got closer to inner city areas or more Black and brown, there were less shade trees. So people who had to wait for the bus, people were exposed to heat, they're exposed to the sun, and that impacts them physically and psychologically. We know it in New York, where I lived for a long time. 9 of the 11 bus depots in New York City are north of 98th Street, which is primarily Black and brown. So what does that mean for asthma? What is, for fumes, and if you have breathing problems anyway? So all of those factors show that there are many ways to certainly attack health inequities, which we need to. People deserve to live as long as everybody else. And so it's important that you continue on your working at the health department, but really continue pushing your study so that you can have an even greater impact on the health for people in the community.
All right, thank you. And you had a comment. It says this was an incredible and inspirational, exactly in the line of what I aspire to do in the future, interested in learning more about the effects of historical trauma and minorities. That came from Ashley. So, and on behalf, are there anything in Chief, did we ever get any questions?
So let me mention, so there's a book written called Medical Apartheid that I highly recommend, by Harriet Washington. Medical Apartheid. Oh my gosh, it's probably, I don't know, 8 years old, maybe long. Oh, it's amazing, but all evidence-based, that takes you from Tuskegee through now. And it's wonderful. Just almost, it's like if you think about the new Jim Crow in terms of criminal justice, Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington's really a great book.
Repeat it again, mental apartheid
Medical Apartheid.
or medical?
Medical Apartheid.
I've also read, just to talk about books that sort of address those traumas. I've been reading The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke Harris, and I think that's also really just interesting for me. I come from a background of working in child abuse prevention, and so we focused a great deal on childhood adversities, and just listening to her information, her TED Talk was incredible. It was sort of the thing that sparked my brain. And then also reading the book has just opened my eyes to so many different,
Yeah.
just so many different
Yeah. And her book, thanks for saying that. Her book really looks at ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which really points to the fact that independent of socioeconomic status, independent of ethnicity, almost 75% of children have had at least 3 or less adverse childhood events, divorce, abuse, all those other factors, and how it impacts their brain, how it impacts their functioning. And trauma to children just is really, really, really a huge, significant factor to how they do psychologically, how they do physically, and then in the world in terms of their ability to make money, go to school, all those factors, which if we could get a handle on trauma and child abuse, I mean, it would just help so many people.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much. Chief, I was going to ask, was there anything in Facebook Live or on YouTube?
Nope.
No. Okay. All right, Dr. Taylor, you were awesome. On behalf of Dr.
We do this all the time, so.
I would say, on behalf of Dr. Lisa, who had to go with her connection with her travel, we want to say thank you so much for all the information you got. And I know this was a lot of information, a lot of very important information. I want to let everybody know that you can go to our MHI's Facebook page, and you can see this recording. It will be put up there so that people can see it. Please reach out to others and let them know that this is some information they don't want to pass up. So please go to our Facebook Live, MHI's Facebook page, and see the recording of this. Again, I want to say,
can I just add one thing too for Centerstone? Sure. If you have an opiate addiction, alcohol addiction, and don't have insurance, we have public funding, we will treat you for free. Genoa is a pharmacy that's at our location on 6th Avenue in Manatee. If you're underinsured, uninsured, we can help get your psych meds, psychiatric meds for $1 or $2. So it's a resource.
And give them the name of your organization so they make sure
it's Centerstone of Florida.
Right. Okay.
941. I'd mess up the phone number. So
what's Centerstone of Florida? And it's in Manatee, right?
941-782-4150.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you next month at MHI's Healing Circle. Thank you. All right. All right, Chief, we're off.